I just find these LLMs altogether too, let's say, ego stroking, right? Too compliant. They want to please you, and so sometimes, let's say, I'm using it for a question, I find that they don't push back enough, right, with some hard truths. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Marshall, founder and editor-in-chief of Venturebeat. We're diving into the top 5 trends shaping AI strategies in 2025. We'll cover groundbreaking innovations from the evolution of AI agents to personalization and cost efficiency. I'm here with Sam Witteveen, who's the co-founder of Red Dragon and an ML and AI expert and developer.
Hey, Matt, good to be here again. Happy New Year.
One of the top 5 things that you need to be thinking about for your AI strategy for 2025 is the lovely word agents, right? AI agents that everyone has been talking about. There's this sense of gullibility. There's this sense of hallucination, right? If you got an agent that's scraping URLs and then it kind of coughs up a URL that's wrong, for example, and it gets thrown into this never-ending infinite loop that needs to be somehow hard halted, right? Can you talk a little bit about whether agents really are ready?
Okay, so let me put it this way. Last year, me and my team built 48 different agents. We looked at this just at the end of December. And interestingly, the ones that we built at the start of the year, a lot of those worked way better at the end of the year just because the models got better. So this is something that we're seeing is that at the start of last year, the big problem with agents was reliability. I think even in the middle of the year, the problem was still reliability. Over the last 6 months, things have started to get a lot better in that sense, and that's due a lot to better models. That models are just getting better at doing less hallucinations. Getting better at they're being trained for these agentic tasks too, so they tend to respond better than they did a year ago. So I think that's the first thing that we're starting to see. I think agents, at the end of the day, agents are just software, right? For me, the biggest difference between a normal piece of software and something that's agentic or is just where you've got the LLM making some kind of decision as opposed to conditional logic, right? In normal coding, we would say if X is greater than 10, then do path A. If it's less than 10, do path B. Now we've got an LLM, we can say, if you think that this is a good response, give it to the user. If you don't, go and rewrite it, right? And make some tips about what should be changed. So that's the key thing for agents. One of the things that I think is on the sort of research side and development side is still progressing a lot is this idea of LLM as a judge. So this idea of basically having it so an LLM is the one that's sort of making these key decisions and is able to judge outputs and be able to say, no, this one is better than this one. And as all this stuff gets cheaper, rather than just do one output from an LLM, you can do 3, 4, 5, and then have another model judge them to pick out the best one. And all these things are making these things become more reliable. As they get more reliable, suddenly now they open up, whole new things that people can do with them. And I think that's what we're starting to see, the idea, even things like this time last year, the idea of building something that would give citations really wasn't very common. Whereas now we're seeing lots of agents cite, their work, being able to have a link to here's where I got that piece of information from. Here's where I got this other information from. And that's making a big change. I think things like that is giving people more confidence in what they're seeing come as the final output so that they can check it. They're not just treating it as a black box. And I think that's really important for business, for anyone. We're talking about the analysts and stuff like that. They need to be able to go and see, like, hang on a minute, you said this and this and this, show me your proof. And suddenly when they can read, oh yeah, that was referenced correctly and that was cited properly and stuff like that, then that reliability opens up a whole new world. And I think that's where we're at now with agents. Things like RAG and stuff like that make these things much better. One of the things that I think we will see this year is if I'm making a little travel agent example for YouTube or to show people or something like that, it's probably going to be pretty surface level in that it will go off and do all the stuff and then come back, right? And ideally, it will do that within a minute or so. But I do think the future is going to be things where if you are actually a travel agent, you will have all the personas of your customers roughly like worked out that, okay, this person is single, they're in their 20s. Okay, let's have an agent go and just do all research for these destinations in Europe and just for these people and put together a whole sort of report on that, which then gets used in the future when someone with that persona wants their travel plan. So it becomes data for RAG, right? For like real time sort of things. Over time, the LLMs can work out different parts of that, and then they can store that in RAG so that at the real time use, people can get the information much faster, much more relevant.
Okay, just a quick timeout. If you're really interested to sort of find out some of the latest thinking around when and when not to use agents, Anthropic themselves have released a really nice blog post in here where they talk about what agents are, how and when to use the various frameworks. I would concur with most of the things they have in here. The other thing too is that they've got some really nice examples of some of the well-known agent patterns. And you can see they've got very simple descriptions here of explaining, okay, what this kind of pattern is, when you would use it, sort of common use cases, that kind of thing. So if you want to find out more about agents, check this out. It'll be really useful for you, giving you just an overview quickly of the types of agents that there are and how they're built and how they're structured.
Okay, Sam, I want to move on to maybe a related concept, but maybe distinctly different here for next year for people to watch, is kind of relying on the model more. And you tell me if you agree or not. But this idea that evals are everything, right? Evaluations of the model, right? So if you're evaluating which model works, and then you stick with the model, but you don't spend a lot of time pre-processing inputs to make sure that they're going to go in correctly to a model, processing post to make sure the outputs are working. But this idea that you mentioned, RAG, right? That you basically are using a model, you're using RAG, like a retrieval augmented generation tool that goes to a database, but you're not spending too much time fine tuning your model. Again, if you're an enterprise user of some of these tools, would you agree that this is a distinct concept that people need to keep an eye on?
Where evals are really interesting. So evals basically where, if you've got a preset of evals and you're constantly checking the models, right? We're definitely seeing really interesting things recently where models seem to change over time. And that could be because as the big companies are basically trying to run the models cheaper, they're doing distilled versions of it or something. And then people using it for certain things notice that, hang on a minute, this worked fine last week in the model and has worked fine for the past 6 weeks. Suddenly now this doesn't work the same way. There were lots of interesting conversations about that on Twitter. The other thing too, I think what's really interesting around evals is that when you sort of get a lot more conscious of how to evaluate the output of something and what it is that you actually want, not only does that make you better with LLMs and AI, it actually makes you better with humans, right? When you can clearly articulate to a human, this is what I want, here's how I want it to look like, here's what I'm going to expect in it. When you get really specific like that, humans suddenly perform a lot better. And I think, one of the things I've seen, like literally people, managers and stuff tell me that like, oh, I've gotten much better at giving directions to my team just from getting good at prompt engineering or just getting good at, looking at writing the right evals for models and stuff like that. And I think this is an interesting sort of concept, right? This idea that really we're now trying to treat these things more like, we would a human where we have an expectation that forces us, as humans to be much more clear about our own expectations. Any company should have a set of evals that they run against anything that they're doing. And that should be, even just simple things like you don't want things mentioning competitors. You don't want, all this sort of stuff. You want evals to test that stuff. You want evals that, look at every way. And Over time, you collect those from the real world, you collect them from what people say and stuff like that. But at the start, you need to get your teams generating a really set of high quality evals that you can use for any model, for testing any sort of agent or service.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, Sam. Right, this idea of the models making humans better and clearer. Right, you hear these cliches. Communication is everything. Right, it's a downfall of a lot of companies when you have humans interacting and assuming that they understand each other.
Okay, so the importance of evals really can't be overstated. We can see here, this is from the OpenAI evals framework on GitHub. And they've got a tweet there from Greg Brockman, the president of OpenAI, or former president now of OpenAI, saying evals are surprisingly often all you need. This is one of the key things that people make such a big mistake on, is that they go along, build something, have it working, and then every time that they see a new model coming out, they presume that this new model is just going to be better than everything before without testing it on their particular use cases. There are many times that new models come out, and while that they do better on many of the sort of well-known benchmarks for your particular use case, they either one, may not be better at all, or two, they require you to change the prompts of how you use them. So learning how to use some of these eval frameworks is really key. Learning to understand the concept that anytime you're going to change a model, you need to run a whole set of evals to check, is this going to be good for not just the sort of first response back that the model gives you, but if you're using agents, all the different steps in the agents, all those particular things. So OpenAI themselves have released a number of frameworks and things around evals. In fact, I think if you give them your evals, they will let you test for free, which I would not encourage you to do. I would basically, encourage you to keep your evals private and not give them to people outside your organization. They really are one of your forms of intellectual property that you want to be right on top of, and make sure that you can test every model that comes out, and that you're not having people doing training on your particular evals to make it look like it's a good model, where when it gets into production, it actually doesn't work out.
There's another trend. It does seem that there was this plummeting of cost, right, of price for using these models, and the reason for the cost is obviously one, competitiveness, right? OpenAI came into this year with a distinct lead, but now these other players, Google, Anthropic, the tension with Microsoft, obviously, and then a whole bunch of open source providers from China and elsewhere, right? Meta open source is big player, right? Putting obviously this competitive pressure on prices, but then also the efficiencies from hardware and software, right? In terms of post pre-training, all kinds of things happening where the cost of delivering these models is getting so much more efficient, and so all of a sudden, right, you see, a tenth or a kind of a hundredth of the cost of serving these things. Do you see that continuing to happen in 2025? I think is a big question. And then what are the ramifications of that? Again, for enterprise users, right? It would seem like the cost of experimentation would go down, the cost of deployment would go down, and just makes it all the more urgent to start getting involved.
Look, I totally think that the costs will still go down. I think one of the things that hasn't been talked about a lot publicly is when we talk about research in AI, a lot of people are talking about the research that creates new models or that creates, new techniques and stuff like that. What people have not been talking about, which has also been going on, is research into just how do we do the current thing 10x more efficiently. I think for companies, they should start looking at it in a different way. You're going to be able to afford to use it for every product going forward. So really, you want teams that are working on things. So as these costs come down, you can go, right, we've just gone across that marker now where we can have, an LLM agent used every single time a customer does X, Y, or Z. And I think we're going to see that. I think that's something. We are definitely going to see newer, lot more expensive models at the same time as well, with the whole sort of test time compute thing. But we're also going to see, just the good enough models which are good enough for 80-90% of things out there. We're on a path to zero, right? These tokens are just getting so cheap. And more importantly too, they're getting fast, that's a really key thing.
So let's dig in on how Grok is driving that cost down and efficiency up. So Grok's LPUs can achieve a throughput of up to 300 tokens per second for large language models like Llama 3 70B, while NVIDIA's only achieve about 30 tokens per second. Grok's chips can generate over 500 words in about 1 second, while NVIDIA's GPUs take nearly 10 seconds for the same task. Finally, around the cost per token, let's assume that the hardware runs for about 10,000 hours. This would put NVIDIA's cost at about 4 times as expensive as the cost for Grok's. To be clear, we're comparing Grok's LPU with NVIDIA's A100 GPU. So I wanted to go on to another theme, Sam, which is personalization through memory, right? And maybe this isn't the way the industry talks about it, but it's something I've been thinking about, right? And this is the idea around, OpenAI's storing of information about you has shown, or me, or it's millions of users, right? It's basically opted you in as a consumer to basically saving information about you and your prompts so that it can really deliver a great personalized service. Now, my understanding is that the rest of us, maybe businesses that are working with their users, if we're calling it, an OpenAI API, we don't have that same memory, right? There's no persistent memory in that tool. So there's a workaround, right? Which is that basically, if you're working with customers, maybe they've opted in, your clients or your customers, that you can save certain amounts of information about them by essentially a RAG tool, right, or a knowledge base. But then right, so you're saving information about that profile. So this is something that maybe people don't like talking about. There's obviously privacy concerns here. A lot of consumers are going to be, concerned about this sort of thing, or businesses gathering information without opting in. But is this a big trend for 2025? It feels like personalization, the memory of what a user actually has, right, in its conversations with you. It feels like that's a fundamental thing that businesses are going to want to get their hands on. Is that something they should be doing in 2025?
Yes. I think you can look at this as like the memory is what you inject into the context, right? Into the context window of the LLM. And so, yes, like not only do you want to remember stuff just about you, but if you're a business user, you want to remember stuff about the company, right? So that if suddenly the you want the agent to know where the company's located, it can just look that up from a memory or something, right? That's definitely a thing. The whole idea of personalizing, knowledge graphs on people is definitely a thing, right? That this is something that we've been playing around with. Whereas through a conversation, you want the LLM to pick up what are the important things of that conversation that it should remember. And that will be things like, if you mention your wife's name, you mention your kids' names, you mention that you've got a pet cat, all these sorts of things. I can help the model in the future to be able to have a conversation with you, and not just things like that. You might even say to it, "Hey, oh, by the way, remember that next week is my wife's birthday, and I need to get something." I think this personalization is not just the memory element, but we're also starting to see these for lack of a better word, these AIs move from just being reactive, where you basically sort of talk at it and it gives you responses, to going forward, we're going to see these things reach out to you and say, "Hey, I know you didn't set any reminders or alarms, but I know that it's your wife's birthday next Tuesday. Did you get something?" Get this kind of thing. And this is, lots of us who've been sort of working on the idea of personal assistance for a long time. This is exactly what we've wanted, right? Is the ability to basically just infer things about the user from previous, conversations and stuff like that. you're right that there could be privacy issues around this, and you want to make it so that people can wipe it whenever they want, and they could remove different things. I think OpenAI has done a pretty good job at you can just turn it off at any point that you want to with ChatGPT. I think those things, but I think people are going to find that there's just so much value in having this thing know about you, know about your habits, know about like things that you've done and asked it to help you with before. If people want to test this, I'll give people a little fun sort of play around with ChatGPT here. Go into ChatGPT if you've got a ChatGPT account and ask it to make a picture of everything, of everything that it knows about you, right? And you'll find that it uses that memory to basically, create a picture. Uh, and it will surprise a lot of people that it's been paying attention when you've asked it questions about something, and that kind of thing. So and it will sort of gather something. So it will, obviously it's going to be hugely wrong, but it's going to guess at a lot of different things based on things that it knows about you for creating a picture. So that's a fascinating one. That people could try out.
Yeah, this idea that it's moving away from just a helpful assistant that wants to please you with answers, but that it might actually help you have a better marriage, right? Related to this concept of kind of personalization, right? Moving beyond chat, you provoked me a little bit. I just find these LLMs altogether too, let's say, ego stroking, right? Too compliant. They they want to please you, and so sometimes, let's say I'm using it for a question, I find that they don't push back enough, right, with some hard truths.
I do think, yeah, that's a real thing, and that comes from the alignment training. So one of the things that sort of people are looking at now is like, how can you have individual alignment training? So like, how could you have it so that your version of the model, or is aligned in a certain way that you want it versus someone else? And I think this is something that we will see a lot of the top labs work on. And if they don't get it right, I think we're going to see the open source people start training really cool fine-tuned models that maybe are very critical or are very, push back, like you said. And there will be a demand for that. That will be something that's really interesting there.
Okay, so just an aside, I talked about a prompt that you can use in ChatGPT to sort of see the effect of the memory that it's keeping about you. So in here, you can see there's nothing else in here at all. I've just basically put in the prompt based on what you know of me. Draw a picture of what you think my life currently looks like. Now, at the time that I did this, I was actually on holidays in Spain, actually staying in Bilbao. And I'd been asking it questions about the Guggenheim and some other things in the city, where to go eat and stuff like that. And you can see that even though this is a fully new conversation, it's drawn this picture, and it's basically decided that my current life looks like balancing the intense focus on AI research with the unique charm of Bilbao. So it certainly got the Bilbao parts right. Unfortunately, I was in a hotel at the time with only my laptop, so I didn't have these nice, beautiful big screens and desk and stuff like that. Check it out and let us know what you think.
Something that we've been seeing and hearing a lot, inference, right? And then also, test time compute. The scaling laws for models apparently started to plateau over the last year. And so a lot of the leading models decided, hey, there's a lot of gains to be achieved by not investing in training on more data, but for the the pre-training process, but actually at the time of actually going to market and answering a question, right? At the time of inference, right? That there's going to be a lot of gains to making models more efficient there. Can we talk a little bit about what this means, right, for enterprise users? This idea that maybe reasoning is also is growing at that on that side of things, but also, I guess, when you're actually using these models, right? This is a slightly different point, right? A lot of these bigger enterprise companies, when they're actually deploying it, you're seeing a lot of efficiencies gained by lower inference costs, right? If you have competitors suddenly like Grok, right, or Cerebrus or Samba Nova coming in and saying, hey, NVIDIA, you're not the only one in town. We're going to compete with you, or we're going to do things much more efficiently because we've worked something out specially for inference.
So definitely, companies like Grok have helped sort of push down, and really sort of speed up the speed of inference, right? Is the key thing, and also pushing down costs and stuff like that. I think Grok is pretty cool what they're doing. I'm less bullish on the other ones. I've yet to see things that really convince me, like that they can, make things that can compete with OpenAI, with Google. I think Grok is doing a good job at taking open source models and making them super fast. And I think that's going to be, something. It's also going to come down to like who wants to fine tune a model. Because if you think about it, if you don't want to take a model from Google or OpenAI or Anthropic, you want to take something off the shelf. Then the question is, do you want to fine tune it? Because then you can, serve the fine tune thing on Grok or something like that. That's going to be really quick for your company, right? And I think there's definitely going to be a market for that, for people who want privacy, for people who want, to limit data, that kind of thing. The the big thing with this, and going back to sort of like the test time, inference compute thing that you were talking about, is you've got this whole sort of system one, system two thinking, right? This is made famous by Daniel Kahneman. And the idea is that, that LLMs have been pretty good at system one thinking. Like, hey, look at this and tell me this kind of thing. And if a human could do it in a split second, AI can do it, pretty well. If it requires more thinking time and reasoning, then they haven't been so good at that. And this whole sort of new inference compute thing, this whole sort of rolling out of chain of thoughts and stuff like that is starting to move into that system two area. So, one of the things I think, that everyone should be asking, and I would ask it back to you, is like, okay, where are the areas for for companies that really require a lot more thinking, right? A lot more sort of thinking. We know that there's obvious ones like drug discovery and things like that. But my guess is that there are probably thousands that we haven't thought about. Like, in the marketing department, there's probably some really deep thinking that could happen about strategy, about, buying ads and stuff like that. And about like, how much do you spend at the top of the funnel versus the bottom of the funnel? And how would you know that if you flip that's starting to work? And what sort of time frame would that take? These are things that that can't, even humans can't answer those really quickly. It really requires a lot of thinking and perhaps sometimes even groups sort of debating it about. And I think this is where this, inference compute thing happens, is this system two thinking. So like, where do you think that's going to be the biggest impacts of that are? That's what I'm really interested in also.
It does feel that it's related to that idea of chain of thought that you're talking about. Do you have a problem where extra thought time is going to help? And right now it feels like we're talking about discrete problems, right? If you have a little more time, you're going to do a little better on coding, right? You're going to do better on math, right? Or some cybersecurity areas, some exams, right? If you have some more time to think through a real set of processes that lead to a conclusion. But some of the areas that may not work with extra time in thinking are creativity, right? Or your things just get your raw knowledge, right? Do you know it or you don't, right? So you can't trick yourself into actually coming up with an answer if you're never going to get to it, right? So improvement of things like writing, right? A writing ability and synthesis, some of that you may not need more time on, right? It does feel like this area that is called the latent space, that there's a lot of research happening now is going to be big in 2025. In September, OpenAI released its O1 model, and it was the first time the switch in focus happened from emphasizing pre-training to emphasizing the importance of test time compute for performance. So OpenAI uses its chain of thought and other techniques during test time to reason for answers. OpenAI released this graphic that shows the performance on the USA Math Olympiad AMY benchmark improves consistently, not only with more training, as you see on the left, but as the model spends more time thinking at test time, as you see on the right. 2025 is shaping up to be a pivotal year for AI strategy. From the evolution of agents to cost efficiency and personalization, these trends offer both opportunities and challenges. Enterprises that embrace these changes with a clear, focused strategy will be well positioned to succeed. Don't forget to visit Venturebeat.com for more in-depth analysis and to subscribe to our newsletters. Stay ahead of the curve, and we'll see you in the next episode.